Okay, I'm going to turn it over here. We've got this esteemed panel they all are doing some great things with capital and money and projects and all of that. And I'm very honored to introduce you to the moderator of this panel, who is also a business partner of mine and in all types of ways. He's a brilliant entrepreneur.
Where's that person?
And he's next door. No, let's see. This is the great Wole Coaxum.
Oh, you're kind. Thank you very much, Clayton. I appreciate it. Okay, so testing. What turn?
Somebody's phone.
Somebody left their phone. That's all you need. Samsung, and it could implode at any moment.
Right.
So we're going to get started. So first, what we want to do is something interesting today to really talk a little bit about. We find ourselves in a gig economy, and it's sort of a hustle economy. And that's why we came up with the name, Don't Knock the Hustle, Create One, because I think the way the economy is evolving requires each of us to become our own type of entrepreneur, or at least think about that in new and creative ways. And what we find ourselves in a moment now where the access to capital, quite frankly, there's a lot of it sloshing around. It may not be moving into the communities that we care about or come from, but there's a lot of money out there. So that's point one. Point two, the cost to get to access to computing costs and other data science and whatnot has come down dramatically. So that cost as a barrier has become more available. And the talent pool is more available, quite frankly. You just look at, there are a lot of talented people who are looking for work, and given the right opportunity, could be very, very effective. And I think the other thing that exists in the world is there's lots of infrastructure to nurture new ideas. There are accelerators and incubators and things for all the various communities, yet we still seem to find ourselves not able to get our hustle on. So what we wanted to do today was to talk a little bit with some individuals who are talking about this or experiencing this or building their own companies or putting capital to work. So we've got a great panel today. What we want to do is we'll have some planted questions that I'll moderate, and then we want to open it up to all of you and a very interactive conversation. So my name is Wole Coaxum. I've created a fintech company that's focused on providing better financial products and services to the underserved in this country. And so we can talk about that separately, but really let's get people out of the payday lenders and the check cashers, and let's empower them to live better and healthier financial lives. So that's what we're working on at MoCaFi. To my immediate left is Katryn Bowe, who is the co-founder and head of impact for a company called Rabble, which is innovative and fascinating, and I think is going to be a game changer for how we build and allocate capital for companies. We've got Blondell Pinnock, who is the right next to Katryn, who is the chief lending officer for the esteemed Carver Bank. And is responsible for allocating capital at that great institution. We have Travis Rundlet, who's the managing partner of Rundlet Advisory Services, which is really a firm focused on helping entrepreneurs be successful in the various stages of their development. And finally, Charles Sheffield, who is the CEO of Capital Access Partners, and is one of the stalwarts. When they make the movie about African-American innovators from a financial services perspective, they'll get Denzel to play Charles. So, so Charles, we'll start with you. Actually, before we do that, everyone just maybe just quickly go through and say a little bit about who you are that will embellish better what I described, and then we'll go into the questions. So, Katryn?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. So, first I'm going to use a mic. There we go. Thanks for the introduction, Wole. So my name is Katryn Bowe. I co-founded Rabble, as Wole mentioned. And Rabble makes it possible for people to become investors. And not just to become investors, but to become investors in businesses and real estate projects that strengthen communities. We just heard Jessica spoke before, super inspirational. And one thing that struck me is that she raised $7 million, and she raised them from high net worth individuals and venture capitalists. It shouldn't that shouldn't be the only source of capital open to businesses. It should be from neighbors. It should be from people across the country who are passionate about the mission of the company, and actually it's possible to invest in those kind of companies. So that's what Rabble does.
Cool. Blondell.
Hi, my name is Blondell Pinnock, and I am Chief Lending Officer for Carver Federal Savings Bank. And as a result of that, I am responsible for financing a lot in the way of commercial real estate, small business, investment, and just developing our community, which Carver serves. Prior to Carver, I worked at Bank of America, and I was in their community development lending group, and was responsible for building a number of projects, including the one that's adjacent to this one. So I'm a Harlem resident, so I am a ride or die Harlem. So as many those of you who know me, but that's about it.
Hi, I'm Travis Rundlet, and Rundlet Advisory is a boutique corporate law firm specializing in providing advice and support, mostly technical, legal, but also some tactical business support to entrepreneurs who are figuring out how to organize themselves, both internally between among the founders as officers, directors, and shareholders, and also externally in terms of structuring and thinking smartly about their relationships between their entities and their business and their capital providers and their commercial counterparties.
I'm Charles Sheffield. Sometimes I play Denzel, but honestly, Wole is really the guy. So he deflects. I'm going to do a bait and switch. Yes, Capital Access Partnership is something that is important to me, and I focus on. I help get asset managers access to corporate pension fund dollars through that vehicle. But I'm here really to talk about CitizenWitness, which is really focused on on-demand legal services for the driving public and individuals. When they're stopped, you're pulled over, you need that instant connection to get some support. And it relates to, obviously, the many of the things that happen in our community. But I was inspired by Jessica, so my perspective is really to talk on this panel a little bit about what it means to be in the fishbowl and looking at the world outside of you and everything else is working, and you're like, how do I get into the, not be part of the menu, but how do I get into the feast?
And you are the founder and CEO of CitizenWitness.
I'm the founder and CEO of CitizenWitness, and that's just what I think about every day.
Okay. So let's start with you, Charles. CitizenWitness. What inspired you to create that company, and how's it going?
What inspired me was pretty much everything that everyone else has seen on television, where people have been pulled over in their vehicles and they've been over-policed. And some of those outcomes have been extremely negative. And I was inspired by the fact that I have an engineering degree in mechanical engineering. I invented some things around robotics, which has a lot to do with gyroscopes and accelerometers, and all that stuff is in your phone. I know a lot about the phone, and I also invested in a company that sold GPS tracking systems to small fleets. So if you're a baking company and you've got 10 trucks, we would sell that. That company grew to $25 million, was sold to the largest in the system. And so I just knew how to solve this problem. And I was angry at the fact that this problem wasn't solved, and this is 2 years ago. And now the world has caught up to us, and now people get it, and we're trying to make sure we can explain what we do contemporaneously with what people have come to understand. So we think we were a little ahead of ourselves. We didn't know how to talk about it, and now people get it, and we hope that we're relevant still, right?
Absolutely. Katryn, you've started a business as well, Rabble, which I think is fabulous. And as you sort of think about the lessons that were required in order to get you going, what does that sound like? What does that look like?
A lot, sure. Well, I guess the first decision. I know there are a number of entrepreneurs in the audience, and that's what makes it so exciting to be here today. But the first decision, the first lesson, was a personal one. Should you become a full-time entrepreneur? Should you quit your day job? And should what you quit it for, what should that be? And how do you know? And that is an incredibly hard thing to figure out. So something that I learned was a weird combination of asking for advice and being super, super humble about the fact that I don't know much. and to really ask for advice. But then to also be pretty selective about actually listening to it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg just gave a great quote in a biography she just put out about selective hearing and how important that is to her success. And that really motivated me of, recognizing the doubts, but not necessarily taking all the advice that's given to you. Because if I had done that, I never would have started Rabble. I think the other advice has to do with diagnosing what you don't know, and doing that pretty early. I mapped out, along with my partner Bowe, who's the CEO of Rabble, we mapped out what the known unknowns. We don't know much about city permitting. We don't know much about certain legal issues related to the Jobs Act that we were dealing with. So and then we gathered resources, advisors, wonderful lawyers to fill in that knowledge. The next thing had to do with unknown unknowns, and that was something that has been super, super powerful for us, for the growth of our firm, is asking people, potential advisors, random people we meet at conferences like this, introducing Rabble, and just asking them, how does this sound to you? Does this make sense? How could you use this? What are we missing? And so much I've learned from that, and unknowns that now are just unknown.
So you made 3 comments that I want to pick up on. One was the idea of selective hearing, which reminds me of a saying that I learned a couple years ago, which is everyone is a role model, not necessarily good. So if you can sort of learn from other people's mistakes and emulate the things that make sense and sort of walk away from the things that don't make sense, you can save yourself a lot of pain and heartache. The other thing that you mentioned was this notion of a wonderful lawyer. I'm not sure.
I didn't say cheap. I didn't say cheap.
That's like wonderful lawyers. That's interesting. And the other piece that I thought was interesting is you talked about advisors. And I think advisors are a underutilized resource for entrepreneurs. And when you've got people who you know in your network who trust you, who believe in you, who want to give you advice, some people you put on the deck, and they become what I'll call a capital A advisor, right? You can use their good name as a way to give yourself credibility. So I think that's a capital A advisor. And then what you'll find is you got a lot of lowercase a advisors, people who aren't on the letterhead, but are willing to give you advice, make their relationships available to you, and the like. So advisors are, I think, and a lot of people do it for free, just because they want to see you be successful. And that is something that I think you can't take for granted. You should really exploit to the best way possible. So Travis, when you come across a company, a person, because one of the things you're hearing from Katryn and Charles is this notion of they had an idea inspired by something and able to move forward. And so I call it you're in the shower and had a good idea phenomenon, right? So if you're so someone comes to you, Travis, they've dried off from their shower and they say, I got a good idea. How can I move forward with this? What do you advise them to do in terms of taking that idea into reality?
First of all, you don't come to me that quickly. There are a number of steps between, the epiphany and getting to a point where I can provide some meaningful support and assistance. Everybody who's a founder and an entrepreneur, Charles, and here on this up here and in the audience knows that starting a business is really messy, and every day is a fight between messiness, squishiness, hairiness, and stuff that you can control, and it's a continuum. And when I get involved is as a lawyer and also as a tactical business advisor is when you're at an inflection point where you need to kind of convert that uncertainty and that squishiness and that hairiness into comfort, confidence, and clarity. I say the 3 C's. And there are a lot of reasons and there are a lot of ways you can do that. You can do that in the form of choosing a corporate structure. You can do that in terms of having contractual relationships between you and your partners and your capital providers and your commercial counterparties, and you can do that in other ways. But ultimately, you need to be at a point where you don't have to necessarily know. I mean, often it's an intuitive sense that there's more that you don't know. You anticipate that more things that you don't know are going to be coming at you faster than you can perhaps manage, and you need to focus on capital A advisors, little a advisors, and people like me.
Thank you. You mentioned, it's interesting, as an entrepreneur, you come to appreciate that time and money are like oxygen. Because if you don't have time and if you don't have money, you're dead. So it's something to think about in terms of part of that journey that you should be thoughtful about. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing about that is that one of the biggest things that I come across in my practice with young companies who are in a position where they're in a capital formation posture, they're shaking the bush, they're looking for money wherever they can get it. And founders always know that there is any founder at any given point, even before they go public, is always in a capital formation posture, and the need for capital is urgent, but it does not always have to be desperate. So people can't confuse desperation with urgency, because if you do that, you get into really bad relationships and you make really bad decisions.
Can I? You please.
Blondell, you gotta go. Unfortunately, you've seen the desperate after.
Right.
Look, I want to say just 2 things about it. I've been on all sides of it. I like those socks, by the way. I need those socks. I've been on the side where I've, obviously run a venture fund and I've made the investments. And every time you have a conversation about the capital, what we call the cap table, it's uncomfortable. And, prior to starting the venture firm, I went through that process. I picked 2 partners. It worked out fine. We were equal partners. It worked out fine. One partner might have been strong in one area, but thank God we knew each other well enough. We worked out fine. Right. Every time I've made an investment, I've had to have a conversation, which was, I know you think this person is your partner, but that amount of equity doesn't really make sense. It's like going into someone's family and having a conversation about their wife or their husband or their kids and say, you got ugly kids. That is not cool. So all I can tell you as a caution is, and we went through this, I want to be brutally honest, as a person who's done it from the heavy-handedness of a venture capital firm, and we went in and said we had the right to be able to fire people underneath the CEO, which was unusual. I made the same mistake and had to have an investor come to me and say, you've got all these lowercase a advisors, they can't help you, you're going to have to take away their equity. You have co-founders who are X amount and they have to be, put into another box. I had to go to people who invested and say, I gave you X amount of, I'm shaking because it's real, right? You gave X amount of money, you gave X amount of equity to somebody, you got to retrade that deal. Yeah. That sucks. Yeah. And I'm an expert. I swear to God, I'm a fucking expert. And I made that mistake. So I'm going to tell you that you're going to probably make that mistake too. And then the best thing you could do is have the integrity and the relationship with the people around you to say, if I make a mistake on this stuff, we collectively do, you got to fix it. You don't know. And I knew.
So, Blondell, I have a question for you, but you want to get in on this conversation. So, no, go ahead. No, get in on this.
Set the context.
I'll set the context. You are the money person, right? You work for one of this country's most recognized community banks, which is a real asset to all of us. And you're thinking about putting those dollars to work every day in the communities. So what are the different types of financing options that are available to entrepreneurs? And is one more beneficial than another? Is one more realistic than another? So how do you think about that conversation with the budding entrepreneur?
Sure, Wole. So, I think there are many things that were said here that fit squarely into what it is that I do on a daily basis. As Katryn said, she said, when you're thinking about starting a business, you have to start thinking, well, when is it that I quit my full-time job, right? And that's a very important, pivotal point for anyone who is considering being an entrepreneur. Why? Because that gets to the money piece once again. Because how is it that you're going to be able to finance your dream or your passion or whatever it is that you do? And for many people just decide, I'm just going to stop working and I'm going to devote all my time to this, and that's it, which is, to a certain degree, it does give you the time. But then the other piece of the puzzle that you need for the oxygen, so that's the H, then you need the 2 and the O. So that's the money piece. It does not give you the money that you may need to sustain yourself and to help build and increase the business. And I was going to get to Charles because I know he had a lot of stories to tell, because I've known Charles for a long time. But what we wanted to make sure is that people understand just the basic difference between debt and equity. And Charles started talking a little bit and touching on equity, because that's a much more, we could have a whole panel just on that in and of itself. But for the most part, myself, working at a bank, what I am responsible for doing 9 times out of 10 is creating debt, is debt instruments that I would give to a borrower or give to a business owner or anyone that's coming in that space. And what that means is basically a promise that we are making, and you're promising to pay me back at some point in time in the near future, and you're paying me interest for that money. All right, so that's very, very on a very basic level. The other form of capital that Charles has referenced, and that I'm sure people are going to talk about a lot more here than I will, is equity. And when you are starting a business,
which is stock.
Right. So when you are starting a business, equity infusion or capital is basically patient capital that you do not have to pay back necessarily. However, you are giving up some interest in your business. And for many people who are starting out, that, and depending on the type of business that you have, that may be your best option. Because when it comes to debt, when you have a debt instrument, you have to continue paying on that debt on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis or whatever the terms are. And that may be good in the beginning because you know what the set amount is if it's not a variable interest rate instrument. But if you're starting a business, you don't quite yet know what your cash flow is going to be. And if you have any problems, it can create a strain. It can also increase your break-even point, because you now have this debt that you must pay that's on your balance sheet. Your company has become more leveraged, right? And usually when you sign a debt instrument with a bank, we're going to have some conditions that will prevent you from doing other things. It'll prevent you from acquiring additional debt that you may need in the future. We are going to ask you to tie up some assets of the business and personal assets as well. So when you go into these decisions, you really have to think carefully, what's the right tool for me? What is the right thing that I should be getting? Should I be getting debt? Can I afford to get debt? Or should I get equity and really think about maybe giving up some interest in my company, or having patient capital that might be an angel investor or family and friends right in the beginning before I can even think about giving up some percentage of my company, because I first have to determine if my company has a value that I can give to anybody. So there's a lot that you really have to think about when you are considering your business, when you're considering what the growth prospect is, because when you start talking venture capitalists, they're looking for businesses that can grow to scale. And if that's not the type of business that you're doing, then it doesn't even make sense to start to have those conversations. So all equity isn't created the same, and there are many, many different types. So that's another thing that you really have to think about. And I'm not going to go into that right now, but that's just a brief overview of the difference between debt and equity, and thinking about the type of business that you have.
So I'll tell a funny story. It's not funny, actually, but I'll tell a story about a company which is actually a name brand, a household company that some of you would recognize, where, to Charles's earlier point, they were really desperate for capital, and they had a very savvy investor talking to them, and that savvy investor said to them, I'll buy your company, I'll make this investment, which is relatively modest at the stage that the company was in, and we want 50% of the company. And the folks were like so desperate, like, okay, we'll take it, right? And so the smart money, which was the investor, sort of got a great deal, because 4.5 years later, that company's worth $4 billion. And the founding team that took the deal sort of said, we sort of didn't know, and we were in a tough position, so we had weak leverage, and so we took it. But, and now, a percentage of $4 billion is better than a bigger percentage of zero. So in the long run, it sort of works out okay, I guess. But it can be, you can make decisions that you might regret later if you find yourself with the proverbial gun to your head. So with that being said, Charles, just talk a little bit about your fundraising journey and pick up a little bit on what Blondell was talking about in terms of types of capital. What sort of do you look for in terms of the dollars? Because she's right, not all dollars are the same. So how do you think about that?
I almost want to act like I didn't know that question was going to happen. Because, again, it's all very emotional at the end of the day.
Yeah.
First started off, you really only have your intellectual capital. If you're a person who can program, which I used to do 20 years ago, you can actually build something and monetize it. In my case, I'm really aware that I'm not going to program my own software, so I needed to pay people, and I need to incentivize them to work for near free. So I raised a little bit of angel capital from some friends who would work off of just my word, just that I was going to do something. And that was in the neighborhood of around $50,000. That was done in a convertible note. I said, I'll give you a loan, and I'll give you a discount, which was 25% discount to when I raise some real money. And I'll give you a very low interest rate, but you're getting nothing right now except for the possibility of losing $50,000. And, the embarrassment that I would have if I lose your money. We took that and tried to, pay some bills and, hire some people to do some development that didn't work out, and then we had to raise another $25,000. And those are the same terms, and you eventually get to sort of about $250,000 we've raised, almost on the same terms, but we need to raise $1 million. And so those all came from individuals that I knew, people who had a experience with me, who knew that I could do something if I had some capital. But it took a year almost to really put together $250,000, which I thought I could have done inside of a month. I really did think I could do $250,000. If I won't lie, I really did. And I think I'm special, right? Like, I know people, blah blah blah. I've invested millions of dollars. I mean, I could do that. It didn't work. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's been very difficult. It's been a challenge. I'll say one more thing, okay? What I realized was who my friends were. And it's very difficult to say that. But I want you to appreciate that if you're an entrepreneur, it's a lonely experience. You really are untethered to the rest of the world. You're like a spaceman, or you're in space. And everyone looks at you like you're crazy. You are crazy. You're out there doing crazy stuff. You're a bum. And so we start off with angel money. We're going to raise $1 million of all angel. Then we're going to go and do what our friend Jessica did and raise $7 to $10 million in a real VC round. But in order to make that happen, we have to produce. So we're in the middle of being able to show people, what we have, what we have as a product. Again, we start off with just my word. Now we'll have a product, and because of my relationships, will have a huge customer base that will be able to show something. Without those things, you are still going to be in the fishbowl, looking at everybody eat big feasts, and you're going to complain about how you're going to get out of the fishbowl. But I don't know any other way to do it. You're going to have friends and families. You know, it's the 4 F's: it's friends, families, founders, and fools. And if you don't have the right friends and you're not born into the right family, you know, you're already poor as a founder. You just need to get new friends. You need to have new family. You need to have a new experience, because people don't invest in you unless they see something about themselves in you, and they almost have to see you in their family portrait. It is almost that deep. And so when we complain about why we can't get money, it's obvious, right? It's obvious.
It's a great point, actually, about in the family portrait. I often say that you may think you know somebody, but you actually really don't unless they invite you over to their house for Thanksgiving dinner. So people talk a lot about, do I have a relationship with that person? It's the Thanksgiving dinner test is what I like to use. And the other thing is about friends and family capital. You want to get capital from a family member or a friend that if they lose the money, it won't ruin the friendship. So that's something else you just want to keep in mind as you think about, or ruin their life, or ruin their life. That's exactly right. So crowdfunding has become an important aspect of fundraising. And Katryn, you've been thinking about that. You want to talk a little about how that might fit into somebody's cap table?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we've heard a lot, not just on this panel, but throughout today, about the importance of money. Right, that how do you get to that 50K? How do you get to that $1 million? And up to now, the choices have been friends and family, and taking that a step farther. You know, perhaps some angel investors, strategic investors. Then, you know, 2 years down the road, you know, if you're that small fraction of an incredible company, maybe a venture capital firm would look at you. Banks, especially community-oriented banks, play a huge role in that. There should be another tool out there, especially because we see that investors, you know, high net worth investors who could write a $50,000 check, they look a certain way. They come from certain neighborhoods. They have certain education, certain backgrounds, and that's not reflective of the rest of America. And we think that people's backgrounds really determine, and what people believe in, what people are excited in, really determines what they want to invest in. And the same, on the same token, who you are is partly reflected, determined by how you spend your money. And how you spend your money, a big part of that is how you invest your money. So crowdfunding it ties into all of that. It's a tool that enables individuals to connect directly to a thing. That thing can be a musician who's raising, who's looking for donations to go on tour. It can be someone who's trying to fund a farm of solar panels. Can be a firm that is, a financial technology firm that's looking to raise $10 million to bring their product to scale. So the role that Rabble plays, we're launching in January with our first investment actually in Detroit, then followed by 2 ones more locally. We make it possible for normal people who are of any income level. You don't have to be just above 250K like the laws have been in the past. We make it possible for anyone to become an investor in projects, in businesses, renewable energy projects, real estate projects that are raising money. Projects that might be able to raise money from traditional sources that have been discussed earlier today, and other projects that maybe because they're so innovative on the technology side, or maybe because they're serving people who are lower income, or because they're in neighborhoods that aren't too flashy, are typically overlooked by traditional sources of capital that otherwise they might not be funded. And all the projects strengthen communities. So we think Rabble has a role to play in that, but we're not the only player. In the space, there are a lot of donation-based platforms. We're on the investment space, and we think we're one tool and complementary to community banks and other sources.
So thank you very much. So we got time for like one question, and then I've given the sign to wrap it up. So I'll do two. So one in the front and one in the back, but I'm gonna start in the back first. I need a woman to ask a question too. So I'll go in the back. I can't see. Oh, I can't see you. You're in the dark. Oh, it's the great Pam Pickens. Holla.
I have a question. There was an article I read a couple of months ago. I don't know if it was derogatory in tone or not, but it was about the dumb VC, about affluent persons that come into money by way of their profession, athletes, rappers, different other non-traditional, non-financier related backgrounds. And how do you go about vetting the other side of the money as somebody who wants to be invested in?
Yeah, go ahead,
So I think one, the notion of the dumb VC, I think, is a conceit that's perpetrated by a lot of the kind of established VCs. Anybody who is taking money, who is in the position where they can optionally take money from VCs, should vet them, and just as the VC, the venture capital firm, is conducting due diligence on the company, the issuer, the company that's raising money, should conduct due diligence on the venture capital firm, or any investor for that matter. One of which is to check with other companies and founders to see, one, if they've actually made available if they've kept their promises, and if they've actually provided the value-added services that they purport to be able to provide. A lot of VCs, they attempt to differentiate themselves on the basis not only of their money, but on the basis of their particular expertise in or influence in a particular sector, their relationships, their ability to fill management roles. And so as part of your diligence process, it's important for you to kind of kick the tires and check that, and make sure that that's actually the case. Because if that's not the case, then you're getting into dumb money. And dumb money is a euphemism to refer to people who can write a check, and they cannot necessarily provide those value-added services.
I mean,
real quick.
I think it gets to the point of desperation that you're talking about, that you don't want money, you don't want to be at a point where you're requesting money because you have a gun to your head, and you'll take anything that someone's giving you, because at the end of the day, that when you get to the venture capital stage, it should be a two-way street. Like, yes, I am getting some investment from you to grow my business, but at the same time, I'm hoping that you can help me. Whoever's on the other side of the table, you're bringing subject matter expertise, you're bringing a team, you're helping me advance my business. And if you're not getting that, then I don't know if if you're getting the benefit of the bargain.
Okay, so I'm getting the hook. So I apologize.
Can the panelists speak to the difficulty that a lot of minorities have with crowdfunding? One of my creative friends says, when he puts his films on Kickstarter, no one ever puts any bids in. Is it something wrong with how the marketing is going? Why, there's no love?
That's something sure.
And that's for investors, entrepreneurs.
Sure. Sure. Well, I can't speak to Kickstarter, and generally marketing is make or break with the project. But I look at crowdfunding and at just innovations in the Jobs Act, in platforms like Rabble, as actually leveling the playing field a lot more. It doesn't solve a lot of disparities and a lot of structural constraints that are out there. But what if your friends and family, what if you don't have a lot of rich friends and family? What if you are the source of financial support for your friends and family? How are you going to raise money? Crowdfunding actually has a pretty strong role to play there, especially if the crowd can be your neighbors. You know, can be people who you don't have to know necessarily, but who have a sense of kinship and loyalty and ownership. And then if that kind of like neighborly dynamic, maybe that extends to people who are from, you know, who you went to high school with but live on the other side of the country, or are alumni of your universities, or people who, if you're trying to, you know, launch a preschool for low-income children, are people who themselves have children in preschool, you know, halfway across the country. So I think crowdfunding can be powerful and is not all negative there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just quickly, just with crowdfunding, I mean, I do think that I do agree, and I think it's since it was fairly new, I think it's growing and it's changing. But the crowdfunders that we know right now that are familiar to us, Kickstarter, those are usually generally for products and services, and it's usually to show proof of concept. If you're a business owner, you're doing a business, now you can provide me with a sample of your hair care product, or you could provide me a sample of your jewelry. And so generally the Kickstarter and those in this first iteration of crowdfunding, it's usually for those type of products and services. I do think it's growing and changing, but right now that's probably why your friend is having a difficulty, because most crowdfunding is really for it's proof of concept or some product or service that you're trying to put out there.
Yeah, that's so. I'd love if there's a way for us to keep the conversation going. We'll do it through the Silicon Harlem infrastructure. I want to thank the panelists for their insights. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And everybody, get your hustle on. That's the takeaway. Get something going.
Let's give Wole a round of applause.
No.